Thank you, Enda, for the introduction, and glad to see everyone this morning. So topic, high intensity interval training. You've probably seen my name a few times around the topic. And today I'm going to make a kind of a global overview about potential application interest in the context of health, rehabilitation, and performance. So overview of the talk, I'm going to go through a few key topics about first why we need, or what's behind the metabolic conditioning and the use of HIIT. A few physiology myths that sometimes I like to debunk a little bit. And then something that is very big for me is around what I like to call the key intensity target. So make sure we really nailing the points when we try to get to the right intensity to get the appropriate stimulus. And I'll go through a few off and on-field application, especially as well in the context of what we are implementing here in Aspetar. So HIIT for what? When we think about HIIT, everyone has heard about the name of those letters at least, but what are we trying to improve? And if we had the time, I would ask everyone in the room, and probably everyone may have another, let's say, suggestion or answer about what we're trying to improve with HIIT or with conditioning. But maybe to simplify a little bit, and especially because we're going to talk about different contexts, I think if we put everything together behind the concept of maximal oxygen uptake, probably the easiest way to look at this metric, which is kind of putting everything together, because beyond the concept of VO2 max, it's really about the overall metabolic system that we assess, whether it is at the central level, your lung, your heart, your ability to get the oxygen from the air, bring it to your system, and also at the muscle level, ability to extract and use the oxygen. So VO2 max is a good proxy of your upper limit of especially your oxidative capacity. And bringing that to now the interest for health, it's a pretty impressive study that was published a few years ago now, when they were through close to more than 700,000 patients, and they looked at those typical hazard ratio in terms of mortality and kind of things. And of course, you're familiar with those typicals. We know about those risk factors. You have smoking, diabetes, and this kind of stuff. But very interestingly, when they looked at as well the level of conditioning and those VO2 max values, they looked at in terms of quartile and the distribution in comparison to the most elite, the most fit athletes. You can see that as soon as people were dropping in their fitness level, their mortality risk was increasing pretty sharply. And the overall conclusion of the study is that being unfit carries actually a greater risk than any of the other cardiac risk factors examined. So I think we have to be very mindful of that. And let's say we are careful with our diet, not smoking and this kind of stuff, but are we as mindful about getting fit or staying fit, in terms of our lifespan? And of course, I have to mention my very, very good friend and colleague, Paul Lawson. It's with him that we've been doing most of our work on the topic. And since I've known Paul, so when I know him, we were way younger. It was more than 20 years ago now. Paul was still an elite triathlete. He had a VO2 max about 70. So we never thought about that. But now both of us, we're getting older. And he keeps telling me that he wants to keep his VO2 max above his age. And right now, at the moment, Paul is 53, and his VO2 max is 54. So he's still in that, but not for long. And I had the chance to do a test with Carmen and Mark recently, and I'm 46 at the moment, and my VO2 was 47. So I'm just on track at the moment. I would argue that the test was cycling. I'm more a runner, so maybe I could have a bit of better values if I got measured running. But that's where we are. So that's just about the story of trying to stay fit, to stay alive, if I can say that. That's for health. Now for performance, in many sports, it's pretty straightforward as well that VO2 max is a strong predictor of performance, especially if you take those kind of track and field, very heavily metabolically demanding sports, such as running. You can go rowing, where the correlation is even stronger, because basically what determines performance is your engine, and this is your VO2 max. So it's pretty straightforward. But you know my background as well. I'm a team sport and a football fan. And I'll take you back a while ago now when I started to work with Paris Saint-Germain. And that was probably one of the first match I've seen that.
Di Maria avec Zlatan, Di Maria par-dessus Matuidi, ça c'est la classe de remise de Matuidi.
And that's the PSG team 2014, 15 and 15, 16 with those very, very, very top talented players. And this is an example of a goal among many others. But this is when I had to understand that in this case, VO2 max was of course important, and I'll get to that, but in a certain manner. And those guys were so skilled that if you look at the performance of this team this year, of course, yeah, again, the Paris won the Liga, but also won the 2 cups. We won the Champion Trophy. We won with 93 points, and even the PSG of this season, who's doing super well, and they're going to play the Champions League, as you know, they're still not on the track. They're not on track anymore to make to this record of points in terms of difference of goals. Paris this season is on 55 difference. I think at that time, can't remember the number, was 80 or 90. So it was just I still believe it was the best team in the history of Paris. But now, if you look on the bottom left, in terms of running, PSG was the second last team in terms of running metrics of the overall in Europe overall. So in this case, my point, and it took me a while to collect the right data to really, because I kept saying that running, I kept saying that football is not a race. We don't need to run, but we have to be skilled, and the running is part of supporting the actions. But it took me a while to collect the data, and that's something we published very, very recently about showing that actually there's no link between running and performance. And if you see, that's kind of a case study of a team in Italy, where you can see that in terms of that these are Z score, so it's comparison with the usual running metrics, and they tend to run actually less when either they lose or when they win. And when they win, running less is more way to decrease your internal load and make better decision. But of course, you don't have to run to win and vice versa. And as I said, I've been saying it for a while, but it was kind of a lot of work to get the data to prove it, So back to the fitness and the interest of metabolic conditioning in team sports, I really like the definition of Raymond Verhegen, who's always been a mentor for me. When he says, again, the football fitness specific is just the ability to perform those actions, to be able to repeat what you have to do on a football pitch. And this is where the metabolic aspect comes into play. It's about recovering, and it's a bit of a shortcut, but the idea, you got it through this slide. When we look at the rate of recovery of the phosphocreatine between efforts, which of course, if you recover your phosphocreatine, you're going to be able to reproduce some high-intensity efforts. These rates of recovery is oxygen dependent. So the idea is that if you have a better or higher VO2 max, you're going to be able to replenish quicker and faster your stores, and you're going to be able to repeat. And in the context of performance in team sport, that's what we need. We don't need VO2 max to do more, but to do better. That's probably the biggest takeaway from this long intro. Last bit now in the rehabilitation context. That's kind of the typical journey of an athlete. He judges himself. So his sport-specific fitness drops. And when I talk about sport-specific, it's the ability to play. If it's a team sport player, to play and repeat those efforts, so it drops. And of course, the space when we need this focus on metabolic conditioning is around making sure that we keep and we maintain, we avoid this deconditioning, so that we keep the athlete able to also start to perform and get back to their specific fitness. And this is where probably a lack of emphasis on this conditioning as early as possible is probably going to have a carryover effect throughout the overall rehabilitation. That's why it's important to start pretty early, as soon as we can, on the off-field conditioning, and also bridge the gap at the end with the on-field stuff. So I'm hoping that with this long intro, I kind of managed to convince you of the interest of this overall metabolic conditioning in different contexts, whether it's health, performance, and also rehab. And now the biggest question is which intensity we should choose from, So there's always been a long debate about whether it's better to go high intensity, to go low intensity. There's a lot of jargon. You've heard about, for example, zone 2, the pyramidal model where we go more middle zone and this kind of stuff. There's one thing also that we should be mindful of is that the importance of exercise intensity is really training status dependent. And I like to use the analogy of the toothpaste tube. And when I asking, do you know how to squeeze your tube? It's the same with the training status. When you're untrained, that's when the tube is full. Whatever you press on the tube, you get the toothpaste out. So whatever you do when you're untrained, you're going to have some benefit. But at some stage, when you get highly trained, you're going to have to start to push on the side of the tubes, whether it's for the metabolic conditioning, but that's for strength as well. You can do an overall circuit, whatever. You may improve your strength if you're untrained. But when you look at elites, they have to go high load and quality, this kind of stuff. So the same for the metabolic conditioning. That's my take about the training status. But now if we go more performance, and now I take you back a while ago as well, when I started as a strength and conditioning coach in handball, which was my sport. And of course, I just back of the back of all my studies and so on. So I really wanted to make sure, because at that time I had no clue if one intensity would be more efficient than another. I would just try to make sure that we would hit every intensity throughout the training process with my athletes. So we would do some proper high intensity interval training over a few minutes. If you go HIIT, it will be close to your VO2 max, will be about 10-minute work, this kind of stuff. We will do also some threshold, there will be training, there will be some, whether it's on court or, for example, some runs, these kind of things outside. But also I pushed very, very far as well, what we call the extensive, the base type of endurance training. Now it's kind of been coined like zone 2, and I took those players, those handball players, I took them for 3, 4, 5 hours hikes in the woods, in the mountains, because we all believe that it was important for them to build this base, this low intensity, long distance, long volume based. Off the back of that, I quickly understood that I had broken probably half of the players, taking them in the mountains, because as you know, team sports, and especially handball, those guys are very, very explosive. They have a lot of fast twitch fibers, and they tolerate very, very poorly the volume. But never mind, I thought it was important, so I just said, just do it, So thankfully, we learned from our mistakes or our experience, and that also led me to write kind of a bit of, let's say, critical editorial a few years ago now. We got a lot of attention on LinkedIn because people don't like when we challenge beliefs, And this it was almost a rant. I said, no, we need to stop this zone 2 for a few reasons, and add 3 points. And the first point was like, maybe zone 2 works, but we have to tailor it to the right population first. And if we look at where zone 2 works, or zone 2 low intensity kind of stuff, it comes from endurance sport. It comes from cyclists, from triathletes. But if you look at those cyclists and triathletes, they spend hours. If you look at, this is the training diary of an elite Spanish cyclist, the guy spent an hour, 150 hours over 2 months in zone 2. So they probably they get some benefit from that, but they spend some time. So it takes me to the point that if you want to benefit from this low intensity training, you have to spend a lot of time to get the reward from it. Back to team sport, back to football. Can I ask in my position as a conditioning coach, can I ask the coach just to give me 3 or 4 hours to run in the woods? It's just impractical. So my first point is that whatever it works or not doesn't fit. My biggest concern is around the potential adaptation that can come with this type of training. And that's an old study that, again, has been completely dismissed by the people who believe that zone 2 is important. In the context of team sport, again, is that the adaptation that comes with zone 2, of course, that is positive, but it just triggers adaptation on your fiber 1 types, which are the slow ones. But it decreases the amount of your fiber 2. And your fiber 2, that's the one you need when you are doing team sport, because they're faster, but also they have this glycolytic ability and so on. So you just don't want the adaptation that comes with zone 2 at the fiber level. Maybe the biggest concern is that also this kind of slow intensity training tends to decrease the power or the strength of your fibers. It decreases not even the type 2 power, but also the type 1 power. So overall, you may improve your running efficiency at some stage on a metabolic level, But in terms of the running economy stuff, or your capacity to produce power, you're going backward. You're losing what you require when you're doing team sport. So that's also a big limitation to me of relying too much on those low intensity type of running in the context of team sport. And probably the third and most important, I would say, myth that people have, probably again another paper that has been overlooked. That's again from my good mate Paul. Is that I keep hearing people telling me that the adaptation that come with zone 2 are specific to that intensity. And if we don't do zone 2, we won't have those adaptation at the muscle level that trigger or that signal for the metabolic aerobic pathway at the muscle level. But again, if we look at this very nice kind of somewhat maybe complex figure from Paul, it's not right, You get whatever you go for high intensity or you go for high volume, low intensity, we go through different pathway in terms of the signaling at the muscle level. So let's say the call, the message sent to the muscle is a bit different. One way we go for a pathway that is called AMPK, which will go high intensity, which roughly is, hey guys, it's super intense. We need you to produce more mitochondria. On the other side, it's slow, it's long. The message is like, hey guys, it's okay, but we have to repeat so much those contractions. We need also more mitochondria. So at the end, the master twitch, which is the PG1 alpha, is also activated. So whether you do one or the other, we signal for the same adaptation. So now, if you consider my two first points, and that the third one shows that the adaptation are the same, why should we so pushing so much for the low intensity in this context? And that also brings me the peripheral aspect is similar. That brings me now to the interest and what I believe in our context, the better efficacy and the relevance of HIIT is that if we look especially at adaptation that mostly occur at the peripheral level. And if you take about the example of, it's kind of been a seminal study, this one from Gibet, and there have been many, many more, but it was probably the first really well done, not only looking at performance, but also looking at physiological adaptation. They asked a few guys to look at, to perform two very different type of training over only 2 weeks, and they asked them to train 3 times per week, so six sessions only. What they did, on one side, they did what we call the sprint interval training, 30 seconds all out, so you really, really smash yourself, you recover 2 to 4 minutes, and you have to do a couple, maybe 4 or 5 repetitions per session. So it's about 15 minutes per session max, and overall, those 2 weeks, it's only about 2 hours of work, So it's nothing. On the other side, of course, they did those low intensity, long volume, and those guys were doing 1 hour to 2 hours at low intensity, which was in the end a total volume of training of 10 hours. And if you look at the result, whether it's performance-driven, a time trial, or what happened at the muscle level in terms of adaptation, they were exactly the same. So you get the same adaptation performance-wise at the peripheral level, but in 5 times less, in 5 times less the time when you do high-intensity training. So I think that's really showing the potential, the time efficiency of high-intensity training to develop those peripheral adaptation. Now we have to consider as well the other part of the FIC equation. We think about what's happened at the periphery in terms of the oxygen pathway, but also what happens at the central level. So back what I was saying in the intro, your cardiovascular, pulmonary system. And that's another kind of famous seminal study back in 2007 by Balgerud, when they compare in a football population, let's say 4 key training sessions. On the upper left, you see they've done these kind of zone 1, zone 2, easy, but they've done it for 45 minutes. You already see the shortcoming, the shortcut of that is that we don't do zone 2 for 45 minutes, but we'd rather do it for longer. So that's a teaser about the result, but that's something that is feasible with football players, So 45 low intensity. Upper right, they've done threshold, so a bit higher, 25 minutes. And then at the bottom, you see those 2 typical HIIT sessions, whether they did short intervals, 15-15, or they do those typical long intervals, 4 minutes. And guess what? Looking at those adaptation about after the training, they observed some pretty strong improvement in VO2 max, which were accompanied with strong adaptation in terms of cardiac output and their stroke volume. So there was strong central adaptation after the HIIT training, but nothing happened at the central level after the low intensity intervals. My take on that is especially because first, the intensity might not be high enough anyway, but also that the challengers to HIIT, so those low intensity sessions were not long enough. That's really a pitfall of the study. But long story short, if you have 10, 15, 20, 40 minutes, if you do low intensity, you don't get much buck in terms of central adaptation. And for a long time, this has been the only study well designed with good data that can kind of making this point about comparing the different intensity ranges in terms of central responses. And thankfully, you have this team from, so I'm not sure where they are before because there are different affiliations on the paper, but I think Erin is from Canada and Juan Murias is actually working in Qatar. And they've done an amazing job in terms of replicating those studies recently. So they managed to recruit 84 subjects and they went through all the different range of intensities in terms of training. So they went 6 weeks and they went control, they went 50-minute continuous, get my point, a bit short. Then they went around the lactate threshold, a bit higher than lactate threshold. Then they went finally the typical HIIT, the 4-minute by the 4x4 or the 6x4, and then they did some sprint interval training. So they really covered the whole spectrum about the intensity. And they got a lot of measurement. That's why they managed to publish those 3 papers with the same study, but just look at some specific aspect, whether it's central, whether it's peripheral, whether it's performance. So very, very good job on that one. And a bit like to confirming the data from molecular root, it's pretty clear that again, you see that the improvement in VO2 max were way stronger for the highest intensity, and you get the highest improvement for the typical HIIT, in this case, those 4 minutes intervals. I wish they have done those short intervals as well, because I believe they are easier to swallow for a lot of people as well. They missed that one. But they also look at the SIT and the other one. So that's the first take. But again, confirming the Elgerud study, those adaptations were completely driven by central adaptation. So back to having, in this case, they have also an impedance measure of cardiac output and this kind of stuff. So central adaptation, again, very, very strongly related to the improvement in VO2 max through the driver, which is the intensity. And as I said, in the different papers, they also looked at the peripheral adaptation, and there was nothing, let's say, substantially different between the different groups. So at the peripheral level, whether they did high intensity or low intensity, it didn't change much. So again, just confirming, but with more data. So now, again, I think I've convinced you about the interest of HIIT and the time efficiency of it is how do we put that into practice? How do we program that? So because I don't know much about it, I just did a Google yesterday, and Google said, okay, so HIIT workout. That's what I typed, and I got this one very quickly.
Are you ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go!
I'm sure you've all heard about this one. So Tabata has become now is the entry. You type HIIT, you get Tabata. We'll have a 30-minute killer HIIT workouts, 20-minute full body cardio, fat burning HIIT workouts. And what made me cry when I've seen that definition, Wikipedia, thank you. What is high intensity interval training? Is a training protocol alternating short periods of intense or explosive. Up to that point, I'm okay. Anaerobic exercise, let's see. But then when I really cried, when I saw with brief recovery, that's fine, until the point of exhaustion. We decide that we have to kill ourselves when we train. Why should we get to the point of exhaustion? And again, the misconception, again, that makes me not even cry, that makes me, you're going to see me emotive now with some emotion. Again, the drive for the adaptation, like strength, like everything, is to spend some time working out. So it's as if you were going to failure in every single strength session. You won't be able to spend time to adapt. We talk more about time under tension. This is the same. We need to spend time in the zone. And that's for another talk. But, there's a lot of research about the time we should spend in this red zone, close to your VO2 max, close to your heart rate max. It's about spending at least 15, 20 minutes, if we can, in the zone. But now, if I go to exhaustion, especially if I go at Tabata, and that's why I went back to the original Tabata study and I wrote another kind of editorial to say, guys, we need to be serious now. So I called it the Tabata Strophe, how I end exercise metabolism research, because this research, the initial study research from Tabata is outstanding, but it just turned to something very, 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 not even average, very, very poor in terms of how the fitness industry has just misinterpreted this study and made something, don't want to say the name, the term, but the word, but it starts with S and H, So back to that, this study, the 1978 Tabata, as I said, is still probably the best study in terms of assessing the metabolisms of high intensity. They've done what we call accumulated oxygen deficits. It's an indirect way to assess the participation of the anaerobic system. It's heavy. It's still one of my favorite studies. The study is amazing. Now you get this amazing study, and now you get Tabata on YouTube, and people just going all over. It's going to be all over the place, So a lot of things behind that. Again, read that if you want, if you're interested in understanding better the whole rant. But it's first of all misinterpreted in the sense that Tabata, they were doing some cycling work. So there was a little bit of at least bigger muscle group engaged, so you can raise your cardiac output at some stage. Doing burpees, maybe that might raise your heart rate, but doing skipping or jump jack, I'm not sure you engage as much the overall musculature. But there's more to that. It's more a fact that it's, again, as I said, pushing to exhaustion. Even in the Tabata study, when they push to exhaustion, most of the subject participants, they died after 6 to 8 intervals. That means in about 4 or 5 minutes, they were done. And again, that's the biggest problem, to exhaustion. And now if we look at the long-term, the training adaptation that happens when you do a proper Tabata, so which is calibrated, which is done well, they didn't observe a better improvement with Tabata than doing continuous exercise. So on one side, you enjoy your run, whether in your park, you have your podcast, you enjoy your life, or you smash yourself to exhaustion and you suffer and you get the same results. Tell me, unless you like pain, tell me why you would do that, But also the other consideration is that they looked at the anaerobic capacity and how Tabata affected that. And of course, you get a better improvement in your anaerobic capacity when you do Tabata rather than you do when you enjoy your run in the park. Fine. How many of us, if we talk about health and trying to die later to increase our lifespan, how many of us need anaerobic capacity? In how many sports we need to improve our anaerobic capacity? Ice hockey, 400 meters. I'm going to be very, very short on finding maybe combat sports, So again, those guys, they've created something that is actually, we didn't need that. That's my point. But they've done an amazing initial study. So now about doing the things a bit, let's say, better, we have to find ways to make sure we are hitting the right targets. And the right targets are making sure we exercise close to our VO2 max, and then that we spend some time in this zone, because this is the zone that is going to trigger all the adaptation, that send all the signals to improve our cardiac output, our stroke volume, and to create more mitochondria. We need to find the right targets to be in the zone. And it's not doing Tabata that we're going to find the right zone, for sure. So what are those key high-intensity targets? Basically, I said, we need to try to train around VO2 max. Let's measure VO2 max, and let's try to find a proxy of that we can use to prescribe. And this is back to the typical incremental test. This is the gold standard to assess, as I said, the proxy, because we can't prescribe in terms of VO2 max. I cannot ask anyone, I say, Enda, can you just train at 33 millimeters per minute? You can't do that. But now, if we have a speed, a power that is associated with this VO2 max, then we have a clue. We have a mean to prescribe. We have a tool. So again, going a little bit into detail of how we define what we call maximal aerobic power, maximal aerobic speed, or the speed associated with VO2 max. As I said, we go through those incremental tests. Typically, That's an example. Running-wise, you go start running at 10. Every minute, you go a bit faster, and so on. At a point where even if you are able to run a bit faster, to cycle a bit faster, your VO2 max with your VO2 will plateau. And that's when you start to plateau, you likely reach the upper limits of your aerobic system. And when you hit this plateau, that's what we call your VO2 max. So if you want to be really precise, as in the book, as my former mentor as well, Véronique Billard, the proper VO2 max is the first slowest speed when you start to hit your max, start the plateau. So that's the proper VO2 max. We can only have a proper VO2 max or powered VO2 max when we measure gas. Of course, we can do that, but it's not always very practical with athletes. So sometimes we just ask them to go as long as they can. And when they stop, we take that as their maximal aerobic power. But we're not sure, because sometimes if they push a lot, if they have a strong anaerobic capacity, they can do a few more stages. So sometimes we overestimate a little bit their true VO2 max because they are able to keep on despite the plateau. That's a bit that's the nuances, but fair enough. We go lab or we go field. Field, probably an overestimation of 1 or 2 stages sometime, but we have to deal with that, So that's, to me, the best way to standardize, to calibrate our exercise, to use maximal aerobic power or maximal aerobic speed, because we know when we exercise at this speed, of course, we're going to be exercises at our VO2 max. How does it translate now if we were to put that in the field and look at what I call the player locomotor profile overall? So we have this maximal aerobic power, that's my green bar. And as you will see in my next examples, we cannot go only using maximal aerobic speed or power as a reference to set up training prescription, because we have to understand as well the neuromuscular side. And in this case, if we want to assess the full profile, we also have to complement MAS or MIP by your maximal sprinting speed or your maximal peak power, which will be your 6-second maximal effort on the bike, for example. And that shows your overall picture. So in this case, that will be what I like to call a speed athlete profile for a given MAS. In this case, let's say his maximal aerobic speed is 16 km per hour. He may have a maximal sprinting speed of 32 or even more. So very fast, but not a strong base. And we will have other examples of those profile. Endurance profile. This guy will have a stronger VO2 max, but he will be slower. The hybrid profile, the third one, are the perfect profile for team sports because they have a good endurance base, but they're also very fast and strong. And the last one will be neither fast nor fit, and you have to be skilled to be on the field. That's been kind of a typical joke around unfit and slow players. And what we call, and the most important concept when it comes to understanding the overall tolerance, capacity to tolerate high-intensity exercise, is with the focus on what we call the anaerobic speed reserve, which is the power or the speed reserve that you have in between your maximal peak power and your maximal sprinting speed or maximal peak power. Now I'll take you a few case scenario. If now today I was to ask anyone in the room to perform the same HIIT, so we all go on 250 watts on the bike, that will be, for example, the relative intensity for many people. The very fit guys, this absolute intensity might not even be above their VO2 max, so they will never reach this red zone. For the less fit guy, maybe this absolute workout at 250 for the unfit, that might be above the MAS, so they might start to struggle. But now, if we look at the proportion of the reserve that this absolute workout will represent, will be completely different. And you can figure out that the first guy on the left, using only 15% of his reserve, will probably tolerate better than the other guy who would be using 25% of his reserve. So we have, for sure, quickly understood that we have to go a bit faster than just going through absolute. And a while ago now, and that's again, Véronique Billard, she went, let's use percentage of MAS at least. So in this case, for those athletes, both are exercising at 20% of the MAS, but they're still using a different proportion of their reserve. And the only accurate and the best way to make sure everyone is getting the same strain, the same metabolic disturbance, is to go on percentage of the reserve. And in this case, we equate the demands, we equate the stimulus. And if we're now looking at time to exhaustion around those exercises, they will be similar. Like everyone will struggle the same because everyone will be exercising at the same level of strain and metabolic demands. So maybe that becomes a bit more complex at that stage, but I'm just pushing so much so that we have those two key intensities so that we can tailor and program HIIT training with the right intensity. And that's the way we should go. So application of off-field, of course, we can repeat the same incremental type of test, but in this case, that would mean if now, imagine we are in the off-field part of the training, we have to, and we use different exercise. We use of course the bike. We use the rowing machine. We use those air bikes. We use ski erg. That's a lot of incremental tests to do, and it's a lot of work. So that's a discussion we had, of course, with the fitness team here, and we said maybe we can kind of use a trick. And we went back to also one of best study ever from Véronique Bia, when she was the first to look at the time we can sustain our VO2 max, or when we run, in this case, at our own VO2 max, how long do we last? And of course, there's a lot of variability depending on the profile, but roughly, we are able to maintain our VO2 max or the speed associated with it for between 4 to 7 minutes. So you do your incremental test, you find your VO2 max, and now how long you last? Not the same day, of course. You need to recover, you start again, and how long you last. So we can go backwards. And now the idea is if I cycle at my maximal intensity for 5 minutes, I'm likely cycling at my VO2 max. If I'm rowing for 5 minutes or 4 minutes, I'm likely rowing at my VO2 max as well, And of course, off the back of BIA study, there have been a lot of people have tried different sports to correlate those time trial doing 4, 3, 5 minutes with VO2 max. And of course it works, So you get a lot of range, of course, whether it's cycling, swimming, whether it's rowing in this case. And that's the decision we made collectively with the fitness group here, is to go 4 minutes all out in all the different type of stations to try to start to have those estimation of maximal power in the different exercise modality. So that's, and as I said, ski erg, that's probably where you had nothing in terms of literature, but why not, So we just applied the same approach, So that's an estimate of maximal peak power, estimate of maximal peak power, we go the same, but we go 6 seconds all out, Back on the field now, so we can go, of course, same approach, whether we go maximal, whether we go time trial. So I don't need to enter into this specificity because it's the same idea, incremental, all out, this kind of stuff. For rehab, I think there's another approach of it to start to get a feeling of players' fitness before we can test them maximally. And that brings us to the lactate testing. And for colleagues in the room, you heard me very big of that. I never really, I had mixed opinion around the lactate stuff for elite performance, because when you can do max, let's do max. But in the context of rehab, it has completely its place, because we can get some estimates of fitness and some key velocities when we look at the way the lactate is actually accumulating throughout an incremental protocol. And here you see Mark is doing a lot of tests for us as well. And that's the example of a player who's been doing the test. And the metric we get from this test, again, we could look at threshold, we could look at different ways to assess the inflection of the curve. There's billions of definitions of lactate threshold, but to make it a bit easier and fast track the process, we assess the speed at which a player has accumulated 4 millimoles of lactate. And that's pretty obvious. The fitter you are, the less lactate you produce, or the later you produce the lactate. And in this case, you see the player, after a couple of weeks of training, he managed to shift his lactate production equivalent at 4 from a bit less than 13 to a bit more than 13 kilometers, which that's an example of a positive adaptation. But back to programming high-intensity interval training in the context of athletes that we can't test maximally yet. And I'm still working on that, on having an estimated prediction of what could be your maximal peak power from the lactate. And in this case, when we start to do some fitness running on the field, even though we don't have a proper MIS yet, we can already make groups. That would be the idea that from the estimated speed at 4 millimole, we can already have a feel that this player will be fitter than other, and we can start to implement some player-specific drills. And that would be an example on the field, where we just have maybe sometimes fixed 6-7 meters in between players, with the less fit players going. My computer is a bit slow at the moment. You will have the slowest players in front, running in this case maybe 60 meters, and the fitter guy running a bit beyond and having to cover more distance. Take-home message. Which intensity, you've heard that, so I'm going to be quick on that. Zone 2 does not really fit. It's limited to peripheral adaptation if you have 150 hours a month, and not adapted to a lot of fast twitch fibers, and that's one big hit. I like this one, the perfect fit, works well. Highly time efficient, you get both central and peripheral adaptations. And this important consideration, as I said, the neuromuscular load needs to be managed. And I said that's what we've done with Paul for 15 years. That's the overall HIIT science model, is understand the manipulation of the intervals that we just discussed, so that we manage the neuromuscular load, we manage the aerobic load. And because of the constant sympathetic activation that comes with it, you have to find a way to balance it. So one easy way to go cold water immersion. That's the best way to activate your parasympathetic activation and recover. Another way, we can also do zone 2, not to create more adaptation, but to recover from the heat. And that's back to the polarized model of many endurance athletes. Okay, they do a lot of zone 2 because they want some adaptation of the back of that, but they do also so much zone 2 to be able to recover from the high intensity session they do. HIIT programming. So remember the analogy of the Tabata trough. We need to make sure we involve a large muscle group so we can get the heart rate and the cardiac output higher. And to make sure we're not just fluffing around and we're hitting the right zone, we need those key intensity targets. We're using maximal aerobic speed, maximal sprinting speed, or maximal peak power, and then playing with the anaerobic reserve, which is the icing on the cake, to be really precise on the prescription. I didn't mention here heart rate because we cannot use heart rate to prescribe. Heart rate has a terrible lag. Every time you start an exercise, it takes ages to drop, to rise. So we cannot say, let's go at 90%. No, but we can use MIS or whatever, this peak reserve, to prescribe. And once we are exercising, then we look at our heart rate and then we see what's happening or not. But so heart rate is a tool to monitor the cardiovascular load, but not to prescribe. But in terms of dose, that's also a question that we always have, is how much is enough, I would say depending again on the population, the context, but one session a week is good to start with, When we're preparing an event or when you're pushing for your rehab, we can go to 3, But a good HIIT session is only about 10 to 20 minutes per session. And now about the heart rate response, it's about trying to accumulate about 40, 45 minutes above 85, or now if we look at 90, it may be 30 minutes about 90. That's for a 3-session block, That would be the typical dose, and there's lots of research to be done about this appropriate dose and the dose response aspect of it. And of course, whatever HIIT we do, we have to complement it, as I said, the zone 2 for the recovery, but also the strength. That back to the two-spaced analogy, there's a lot of studies. They train people with HIIT, they look at improvement in strength. Of course, because those guys were not trained, But if you think about rehab elite athletes, you will never improve strength doing HIIT. So I think that's worth mentioning. And that was my last slide. And of course, I wanted to thank the team that is involved in conditioning at Aspetar and for having, shown the willingness to do all this extra work about monitoring and this kind of thing. So I'm very thankful to everyone. Of course, the whole department, but especially this group. Thank you very much. Thank you.